Deepwater Horizon and the Blood Prophecy. The worst of the explosions gutted the Deepwater Horizon, stem to stern. Crew members were cut down by shrapnel, hurled across rooms, and buried under smoking wreckage. Some were swallowed by fireballs that raced through the oil rig's shattered interior. Dazed and battered survivors, half naked and dripping in highly combustible gas, crawled inch by inch in pitch darkness, willing themselves to the lifeboat deck. But it was no better there. That same explosion had ignited a firestorm that enveloped the rig's derrick. Searing heat baked the lifeboat deck. Crew members, certain they were about to be cooked alive, scrambled into enclosed lifeboats for shelter, only to find them like smoke-filled ovens. Men, admired for their toughness, wept. Several said their prayers and jumped into the oily seas some 60 feet below. An overwhelmed young crew member finally screamed what so many were thinking: "We're going to die." It has now been 8 months since the Macondo well erupted below the Deepwater Horizon, creating one of the worst environmental catastrophes in United States history. With government inquiries underway and billions of dollars in environmental fines at stake, most of the attention has focused on what caused the blowout. Investigators have dissected BP's well design and Halliburton's cementing work, uncovering problem after problem. But this was a disaster with two distinct parts. First a blowout, then the destruction of the Horizon. The second part, which killed 11 people and injured dozens, has escaped intense scrutiny, as if it were an inevitable casualty of the blowout. It was not. Nearly 400 feet long, the Horizon had many redundant defenses against even the worst blowout. It was equipped to divert surging oil and gas safely away from the rig. It had devices to quickly seal off a whale blowout or to break free from it. It had systems to prevent gas from exploding and sophisticated alarms that would quickly warn the crew at the slightest trace of gas. The crew itself routinely practiced responding to alarms, fires, and blowouts. It had experienced leaders who clearly cared about safety. On paper, experts and investigators agree the Deepwater Horizon should have weathered this blowout. So this is the story of how and why it didn't. It is based on interviews with 21 Horizon crew members and on sworn testimony and written statements from nearly all of the other 94 people who escaped the rig. What emerges is a stark and singular fact. Crew members died and suffered terrible injuries because every one of the Horizon's defenses failed on April 20th. Some were deployed but did not work. Some were activated too late, after they had almost certainly been damaged by fire or explosions. Some were never deployed at all. At critical moments that night, members of the crew hesitated and did not take the decisive steps needed. Communications fell apart, warning signs were missed, and crew members in critical areas failed to coordinate a response. The result, the interviews and records show, was paralysis. For 9 long minutes, as the drilling crew battled the blowout and gas alarms eventually sounded on the bridge, no warning was given to the rest of the crew. For many, the first hint of crisis came in the form of a blast wave. The paralysis had two main sources. The first was a failure to train for the worst. The Deepwater Horizon was like a Gulf Coast town that regularly rehearsed for Category 1 hurricanes, but never contemplated the 100-year storm. The crew members, though expert in responding to the usual range of well problems, were unprepared for a major blowout followed by explosions, fires, and a total loss of power. They were also frozen by the sheer complexity of the Horizon's defenses and by the policies they explained when they were to be deployed. One emergency system alone was controlled by 30 buttons. The Horizon's owner, Transocean, the world's largest operator of offshore oil rigs, had provided the crew with a detailed handbook on how to respond to signs of a blowout. Yet, its emergency protocols often urged rapid action while also warning against overreaction. The chief counsel for the Presidential Commission that is looking into the Horizon disaster said Transocean's handbook was a safety expert's dream, and yet, after reading it cover to cover, he struggled to answer a basic question. How do you know it's bad enough to act fast? Of course, Transocean has defended the Horizon's crew. They acted appropriately, based on the information they had at the time, the company said in a statement, adding, this world-class crew, some of whom lost their lives, battled to the end to gain control of the whale. In the end, though, after the Horizon's elaborate defenses had failed, many lives were saved by simple acts of bravery. The interviews and records show. All over the rig, in the most hellish of circumstances, men and women helped one another find a way to live. Drilling is a competitive business, and it was an article of faith that the Horizon's crew members were among the best. Just last year, the Horizon drilled the deepest oil well on Earth at 35,055 feet. On its final day, the main task was finishing off the whale from hell. The Mikado had been behind schedule nearly from the get-go, and the Horizon had been sent to get it back on track. At first, the Horizon drilled rapidly. Welcome news for a crew whose bonuses were tied to meeting schedules. But drilling quickly adds a risk. For all of the Horizon's engineering features, it was tangling with powerful and unpredictable geological forces and pushing rapidly into a highly pressurized 3-mile deep reservoir of oil and gas can be particularly problematic in the Gulf of Mexico's unstable and porous formations. And sure enough, the Deepwater Horizon hit trouble. Heavy drilling fluid, called mud, kept disappearing into formation cracks. Less mud meant less weight bearing down on the oil and gas that were surging up. This set off violent kicks of gas and oil that sent the Horizon's drilling teams scrambling to control the whale. March 8th had been especially bad. A nasty kick had left millions of dollars worth of drilling tools jammed in the whale. Operations were halted for 9 maddening days. There was still so much gas filtering up that cookouts were suspended on the deck. For the crew, the sooner they left the Mikado, the better, so the team quickly got down to business. So along with finishing the Mikado, the rig had to complete several repairs before beginning 2 other high-priority projects for BP. The executives were keen to keep the Horizon on track, and emails BP managers whose bonuses were heavily based on saving money and beating deadlines kept asking when the whale would be finished. BP has denied pressuring the Horizon's crew to cut corners, but its plans for completing the whale kept changing, often in ways that saved time but increased risk. And to make sure the whale was not leaking, the crew would withdraw heavy mud from it and replace it with lighter seawater. Then they would shut in the whale to see if pressure built up inside. If it did, that could mean hydrocarbons, oil and gas, were seeping into the whale. In effect, they were daring the whale to blow out. Designing and interpreting this test, a negative pressure test, requires a blend of art and engineering expertise. There are no industry standards or government rules. Designing the test was BP's job. Yet, the oil company's instructions, emailed to the rig that morning, were all of 24 words long. It fell to the BP company men and the drilling crew to work out the details. But it did not go well. There was strong disagreement over the test results. Pressure had built up, exactly what they did not want. The team's tool pusher was worried. A BP company man said he thought the test went fine. Other rig managers joined the discussion, and they debated whether to repeat the tests. By 8 p.m. that fateful day, after redoing the tests, they all agreed that the Mikondo was stable. In a few hours, the drilling crew's 21-day hitch would be done. They were working unusually fast. Investigators believe that the influx began about 8:50 p.m. Preparing to plug the well, the drilling crew was pumping mud from it, reducing the weight bearing down on the hydrocarbons. Investigators agree that the Mikondo had in fact failed its crucial final test. They had pointed to BP's cursory instructions and questioned whether the Horizon's crew had the skills to correctly interpret the results. So the question is, why these experienced men out on that rig talked themselves into believing that these were good tests. None of these men out on that rig wanted to die. The blowout. By now, investigators agree, hundreds of barrels of oil and gas were moving up the well, gathering force and speed as the gases expanded. At 9:38, well data indicates the first hydrocarbons passed through the Horizon's 5-story blowout preventer. Resting on the seabed, the blowout preventer was an elaborate, fail-safe device that gave the drilling crew several ways to seal the well. But once the oil and gas got past the blowout preventer, there was nothing to stop them from racing up the Horizon's riser pipe, the 5,000-foot umbilical cord, to the rig. It would be 9 minutes before the first explosion. Well data shows 9 precious minutes. The drilling crew had trained for blowouts. Floor hands were the crucial first responders. A driller would call blowout and time their response. This usually involved quickly installing a special valve on the drill pipe to end the imagined blowout. But confronted with the real thing for the first time, someone realized that there were no floor hands on the drilling floor to respond. A waterfall of mud was pouring off the drilling floor to the main deck. Then, in a split second, mud and water exploded up inside the derrick. High above the rig floor, from his perch in a crane cab, Micah Joseph Sandell had a clear view of the blowout. When the mud subsided for a moment, he thought the drilling crew had it under control. But then it erupted again, he said, so loudly that it was like putting an air hose to your ear. Even more unnerving was the smoky haze of gas coming from a pipe opening, positioned like a large shower head high up on the derrick. The Horizon had 2 ways to defend against oil and gas surging to the rig. The drilling crew could turn a valve and divert the blowout out to sea, or it could try to contain it on the rig by funneling it into a device called a mud-gas separator. The separator was much preferred for smaller kicks because it avoided any cleanup and investigation required by a spill. Drilling crews rarely even rehearsed diverting blowouts into the ocean, and Transocean's handbook seemed to offer contradictory advice. It said either method could be used if hydrocarbons entered the riser. The gas Mr. Sandell saw floating down from the derrick indicated that the team had chosen the mud-gas separator, only to see it quickly overwhelmed. The gas cloud spreading over the aft deck was a grave threat. The Horizon's 6 main diesel engines, spanning the rig's back end, were fed by air intakes above the deck. If the engines began taking in air suffused with gas, they might speed up to the point of breaking apart. Doug Brown, a chief mechanic, was doing paperwork in an engine control room, which was sandwiched in the middle of the 6 main engines. 3 of his men were with him. Suddenly, a computer console began chirping, warning that sensors had detected gas somewhere on the rig. "Something ain't right," Mr. Brown said. Up on the bridge, the crew was busy showing off the Horizon's impressive capabilities to VIPs. One of the bridge officers felt a jolt. Kurt Kutcha, the 34-year-old captain, also sensed something wrong. There was a high-pitched hissing. On a closed-circuit television, they could see mud flying into the sea. Suddenly, gas alarms began lighting up a computer console. The lights showed gas spreading over the rig, from the drilling floor to the main deck. There were so many alarms it was hard to keep track of where gas was being detected. More frightening still, the lights were all magneta, signaling extremely high levels of combustible gas. The phone rang. It was the crew and the drill shack. They said they were having a well-controlled situation and hung up. A second call came, the engine control room asking what was going on. The alarm system relied on dozens of sensors strategically placed all over the Deepwater Horizon. When a sensor detected fire or gas, a corresponding alarm lighted up on computer consoles, not just on the bridge, but also in the two other crucial parts of the rig, the drill shack and the engine control room. In theory, this meant anyone in the three critical locations could respond swiftly to the first sign of trouble. As originally designed, this system would also automatically trigger the general master alarm, the shrill warning that signaled evacuation of the rig if it detected high levels of gas. Transocean, though, had set the alarm system so that the general master alarm had to be activated manually. In 2002, a safety consultant specifically urged Transocean to consider changing the system so that human input is not critical for success. Transocean says that having an automatic system is less safe. So at that time, most of the crew members still knew nothing about the unfolding emergency. They were sleeping, watching television, calling home, posting on Facebook, on the drilling floor, inside the heavy tool room. The oil industry has long depicted blowout preventers as the ultimate fail-safe, but Transocean says the Horizon's blowout preventer was simply incapable of preventing this blowout. Evidence is mounting, however, that the blowout preventer may have been crippled by poor maintenance. Investigators have found a host of problems: dead batteries, bad solenoid valves, leaking hydraulic lines that were overlooked or ignored. Transocean had also never performed an expensive 90-day maintenance inspection that the manufacturer said should be done every 3 to 5 years. Industry standards and federal regulations said the same thing. BP and a Transocean safety consultant had pointed out that the Horizon's blowout preventer, a decade old, was past due for the inspection. Transocean decided that its regular maintenance program was adequate for the time being. So many mistakes and so many human errors. And this is also about greed. The death knell for the Horizon was the emergency disconnect system itself. Like so many of the rig's defenses, it also failed to work for reasons that remain unclear. The Horizon was still handcuffed to the well from hell. There was nothing left for the crew to do but to get off the doomed rig before they all died. And of all the emergency procedures on the Horizon, evacuation was the most practiced, but the routine rapidly disintegrated. Out on the now crowded lifeboat deck, everyone could see, feel, and hear the flames engulfing the derrick. The crew was supposed to first report to a supervisor, yet many were simply piling into the lifeboats. Someone ordered the men to get out. Needless to say, that didn't happen. Inside the enclosed lifeboats, heat and smoke were building. Men began screaming at the coxswains to launch. The burning derrick, they warned, might collapse on all of them. Got to go, they yelled. Some were crying. Lifeboat number 2 left first, without many of its assigned passengers. Records and interviews show. And so they left the doomed, burning Deepwater Horizon. The next morning was clear and calm. The Horizon, receding in the distance, burned brightly. The crew gathered on the rescue ship Bankston's deck. Shoulder to shoulder, they formed a large circle. A BP manager explained that they were headed back to Louisiana. Mr. Linder, the former English teacher, interrupted. "We should really say something for our fallen," he said. The group fell silent. Patrick Morgan, an assistant driller, spoke up first. "Our Father," he said, and with that everyone joined in the Lord's Prayer. And this is the short version of the story. Again, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill was a physical manifestation of the book of Revelation. And these are more signs of the end times, transition days, which is a continuing, day-by-day process. Everything that must change for the better, and quickly or rapidly, because it's about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. Revelation chapter 8, verse 8. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became as blood. Revelation chapter 16, verse 3. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. 4. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became as blood. 5. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and was and shall be, because thou hast judged thus. 6. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. 7. And I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. 8. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch humans with fire. 9. And humans were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which has power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. 10. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. 11. And blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. And yes, it's time for all prophecy to be fulfilled. And the fourth angel comes quickly.